faces. It seems like we were all just here yesterday, sitting in these same seats, so thanks for coming back. Appreciate it. If you don't know me, I'm Abby. I'm the executive director here. I first want to thank our sponsors of the Red Bench Speaker Series, Scholler Textiles, Sisler Builders, Vermont Ski and Ride, and then tonight we have special event support from Von Trapp Brewing and Stowe Cider, and so without them this certainly wouldn't be possible. Before I hand this over, there's something else I want to mention. You may see a pair of skis over there in front of that case by the Red Bench. That has Stowe's Front 4 on them, and we're raffling those off. So you can enter for a chance to win here tonight at the front desk, or you can go online. If you go to our website, it's very obvious. It'll just jump at you when you click on the link. We're a nonprofit. I'm a fundraiser. I'm sorry. That's how I roll. Thank you. So get your tickets before April 2nd. We'll draw that April 2nd. What else am I missing? I wrote it on my hand. I'm going to hand this over to Poppy. So Poppy, right next to me, she is the co-chair of our board here at the museum. She's also the curator of this exhibit that you see here, which is no small feat. So. A little bit to the exhibit and then introduce our moderator for tonight, who will introduce our panelists. So thank you again for coming.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks everyone for coming. I've got a little cheat sheet so I don't forget to say what I want to say, which is that this whole research for Vermont's lost ski areas began over 25 years ago with our curator Meredith Scott and Dick Collins. They started amassing a ton of information way back then, and we decided to launch this Searching for Vermont's Lost Ski Areas exhibit this past fall. We thought we would go route Massachusetts border to the Canadian border, and by October we got as far as Route 4, was sort of putting it all together and went, oh, this is going to be a part two exhibit. So the way it stands now is that I, as Abby said, it's no small feat. I am searching for help for the Searching for Lost Ski Areas exhibit. People that might know something about certain pockets of lost ski areas. Waterbury, for instance, I just tagged Brian Linder, Waterbury historian, to do a little research for me there. But if you're from an area where there are lost ski areas that you know something about, or have memorabilia or photographs, or know someone who knows something, drop us a line on our website. That would be most helpful if we could kind of get a little party going to move this project along. So we started by making this big map in the back, which most of you have probably seen, which identifies 175 lost ski areas in Vermont. And out of those 175, 3 of them were brand new to us. We just discovered them last summer, so that's pretty cool. So we're hoping to discover more lost ski areas. So compare that, the 175 lost areas, to the 20 currently existing ski areas in Vermont right now. That's a big difference. So I just wanted to just define what we call a lost ski area. It's an area that operated at one time with at least one mechanized ski lift. And it had to be open for a little bit and had to be closed for a really long time. So that's our definition. We also included lost and found ski areas, and that's what we'll be talking about tonight. And we loosely define lost and found ski areas are areas that shut down for whatever the reason, where the infrastructure was left to rust and decay, the trails reverted back to forest, and this was a process that went over many, many years. But today, the lost and found areas, what we call lost and found, have been resurrected and reinvented as a place to ski and ride. Many of the lost and found ski areas are community-based, locally run, but some are privately owned and operated and are not open to the public. So tonight, we're celebrating the grit and imagination of the panelists here who brought two of Vermont's oldest and beloved areas, Dutch Hill and Hogback, back to life, not as they were, but perfect for the present day. And how a new owner of Magic Mountain pulled his ski area back from the brink of extinction after it was closed for a few seasons. So that's the gist of where we're going tonight, and I'd like to introduce Lisa Lynn, sitting here in the center, our wonderful moderator, owner of Vermont Ski and Ride magazine and Vermont Sports Today. And thank you, Lisa, for pulling together this amazing panel. You did your magic here, and big thanks for the panelists who came from the farthest points south in Vermont to come and be with us tonight. So, and thanks for everybody for coming. So here you go, Lisa. Here's the mic.
Thank you, Poppy and Abby, and thank everybody who is part of the Vermont Ski and Snowboard Museum. And I encourage everybody, if you have not already, to take a look around, because this is one of the best exhibits that I think I've seen here. And it's also a really good reminder of why we need to preserve ski history. It's changing, it's vanishing, and I think tonight we're going to have an opportunity to hear from people who are living through this incredible era. And if we think about it, it's really in the last 100 years, since 1934, that skiing became an industry and a sport. Not just here, it started here, but it's taken off everywhere. And now we look at it as a big business. Yet what we have here, both at the Ski Museum and with the people who are here and with the areas that they represent, really shows, as Poppy said, the grit and determination of individuals and how they have helped preserve a little bit of the history and hopefully continue it in a new way. So I'd like to start by just sort of having each one of these representatives of different ski areas, and I think Poppy might have left off Steve Wood, who's representing Ascutney, tell us a little bit about their area, their experience there. And as we go through these, I also would like to hear from people who have skied these areas, whether they were in their original state or early on. And I'd like to start out with Diana Todd, who has skied Hogback. She wrote, when I reached out to her, she said, I was devastated when Hogback went out of business. So tell us a little bit, Diana, a little bit about what it was like to ski Hogback, what happened there, and what your experiences have been.
What it was like to ski Hogback. That's one of the first places I went on for a date with my husband. So it's got a lot of emotional impact for me. Hogback is in the very southern part of the state. It's in Marlborough, Vermont. It's on Route 9, right on the highway. If you've ever driven between Brattleboro and Bennington, you come up and over and you get to the 100-mile view. That's where the ski area was. And it was a very interesting ski area in that you didn't park at the bottom. You parked about 2/3 of the way up. You parked there and you skied down to get to the lift. So at the end of the day, if you ended up down at the bottom and they'd already closed the lift, you were in big trouble. It opened in, so it was never a big ski area, but it was a substantial one. It had 4 lifts at its peak, and it had 9 major ski slopes, as well as some minor ones, and it had 500 feet of vertical. It opened in 1945-46 was the first season, and at that point they had a rope tow and a Comstock T-bar. And this was when the sport was just getting started in this country. And so even these small areas, these first beginning areas, they were big players. In fact, Hogback got deals going with some of the hotels in Brattleboro to put together ski trains. They would advertise down in New York City and Connecticut and have people come up on the train, stay at hotels in Brattleboro. The hotels would bus them up to Hogback for the day and back. It was right there in the thick of it as the sport was getting started. Where the ski area was put in and why it was put in there is because it was already a tourist spot. It was one of the first tourist spots in the southern part of the state for people that were driving up. This is the main thoroughfare from Brattleboro to Bennington. It's the main way to get across the state east to west to the southern part of the state. And at that 100-mile view, a family owned hundreds of acres there, and they put in a little tea shop at first, and then it expanded to a snack bar, and then they had a gift shop, and then they had a restaurant. And so they were developing tourism, and skiing fit in really well with that package because it gave a tourism for them in the winter. So that's why it ended up there. Once they opened the ski area, it continued to expand. They put in the lodge for the skiers, for the lunches and what have you. They had a little rental shop. They put in a small guest house even. You could eventually spend the night right there. In the 1950s, it was the site of the creation of new ideas in skiing. One of them you can see on the wall over there, the Hogback, the shorty skis. This was called the graduated length method of skiing. Cliff Taylor developed that, so if you know anything about that, he created that scheme, testing it out on Hogback. So we were in the thick of it back then. But you know what else happened in the 1950s? Mount Snow opened. So in the 1960s was actually Hogback's heyday. That was when they were at their greatest extent. They were still drawing in skiers from out of state, as well as a really strong local contingent. But Mount Snow was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and Hogback couldn't get any bigger. The mountain wasn't going to get any taller, and it wasn't going to get any bigger, and there were highways all around it. It was as big as it was going to get. By the 70s, it was definitely a local area. That was when I was introduced to it, dating my husband, and then we were young marrieds and we skied there, so I skied there in the 70s and the 80s. It still had a really strong local program, big after-school programs, local racing programs going on there. It was one of these great family areas where the kids could be dropped off at 8 in the morning and picked up at 4 in the afternoon. You didn't have to worry about them. That was still its strength in the 70s. And then came 1986. I don't know, everybody who knows anything about ski history, they know that the mid-80s, the disaster was insurance. And it was insurance that killed Hogback. The premiums over in one season, the 85 to 86 season was the last season they ran, and then that spring they were told what their premiums were going to be for the next year, and that was when they decided they had to close. Now this is just local lore, but the lore that we've heard was that the premiums were going to be so high that they were more than the take for a season. Not the net, the gross. You can't run a ski area on that. So they closed. And they sold it to a developer. I'm sorry. And the developer was really excited about how he was going to make these elegant, this was going to support Mount Snow. People were going to be able to build their expensive vacation houses there. He immediately put up these signs all along Route 9. Lot 35, Lot 17. So you grew up skiing there, and suddenly you're driving over the mountain, and you're seeing, oh my gosh, it's being cut up into all these lots. They're going to build houses here. It was really heartbreaking. But he was a very incompetent developer. He actually put those signs up before he got any permits. He never managed to get his act together. He just futzed around for 20 years and never sold a single lot. Yay! And in 2006, he just threw up his hands and said, that's it, I'm out of here, it's for sale. So at that point, all the people that had had their hearts broken in 1986 went, we're not going to miss this opportunity, we are going to save this land. And local people put together a committee, and I wasn't in at the very beginning, but I got in pretty quickly, to raise $1.7 million to buy it. And then we put a conservation easement on it, and then we donated it to the town. And it is now a town conservation area. So of all the ski areas that are here tonight being represented that are lost and found, Hogback is the least found. There is skiing allowed there, but it's not promoted and it's tolerated. So think of that 20-year gap between when the ski area went out of business and it came on the market and we went to buy it. There's a 20-year gap in the cultural connection to the ski area. The ski area had been such an important part of the town, plus the restaurant and the gift shop, and so many kids in town had their first job working in the rental shop or at the restaurant or whatever. And then there's this 20-year gap where no one worked at any of the businesses there, no one skied there. So when the group got together to save this land, the primary focus was to save it from development, to keep it from being cut up into smaller pieces. That's number one. Number two was to protect it as forest for wildlife, for the woods, for the soil, the water, having an intact forest. And recreation was kind of number three. And among recreation, the important one was hiking. And then, okay, yeah, we'll do cross-country skiing and snowshoeing too. Mountain biking, ooh, backcountry skiing, ooh, those are kind of, aren't those all done by aggressive young men? There wasn't, the people that raised the money and conserved the land, they primarily were not skiers. I think I was one of two skiing people that were involved, and most of the other people, that wasn't their primary focus. So the first management plan that was written for this new conservation area, there used to be 9 major ski slopes. The first management plan said that you could backcountry ski on 2 of them. Well, I mean, how do you keep somebody from skiing? Well, these 2 were ones that had been kept skiable by pirate cutters over the 20 years. So one of the big challenges for me, helping to manage it now, was to bring the pirate cutters into the authorized community and doing authorized clearing and cutting, not pirate cutting anymore. And over the years, we've gradually worked, and we now are allowed to cut legally to keep 5 of the slopes open. And I am now in charge of the group that's updating the management plan, and my goal that I hope will pass is to have anything that used to be part of the former ski area, be permissible to keep that cut cleared enough to be able to be skiable backcountry skiing. Again, this is no lifts, this is climb it yourself, but it's still being skied, and that's what is important to me, that was a great place to ski because it was a great mountain and had great slopes. It's still a great mountain, it still has great slopes, and that people could come and ski there for free is really important to me.
That's and I think every one of us can understand the tears and the emotion there. So thank you very much, Diana. You talk about moving something to a backcountry zone. Bill, Dutch Hill, tell us a little bit about where that was. And I think this is a great example of how, again, something can be resurrected. And again, Dutch Hill is one of the ones that's right up here. So please go and read all about it, but listen to Bill first.
Yeah, Dutch Hill came into being in 1944. In April of 44, a group of investors purchased the land from, I believe it was a lumbering, logging operation or a corporation. And they purchased it in April of 44. They started cutting on July 4th of 44. And they opened for skiing on December 23rd of 1944. Now that's a lot of work to go from just forest land to actually installing, cutting the trails and putting rope tow lifts in. Initially, the rope tows went up about halfway up the hill. And Dutch Hill is a 520-foot vertical drop hill as well, so it's not super big. But they got 4 trails open that first year, and I think the day that they opened on December 23rd, they had 30 people paying $1 each to ski at Dutch Hill. It went through about 6 different ownerships through the years. Its heyday was certainly in the 50s and 60s, into the 70s. Much as Diana said, less than 10 or 12 miles away as the crow flies, there was a big area being built in the 50s called Mount Snow. And Mount Snow had the clickety-clack chairlifts. Dutch Hill had a T-bar and a rope tow initially, then they threw in a J-bar, but they were competing against something that was going to be very difficult. There was no water available for snowmaking. That was never going to be in the cards for Dutch Hill. It was a mom and pop ski area, and we can look at the maps here and we see how many mom and pop ski areas there were throughout the state, but Dutch Hill was close to the Massachusetts border. Dutch Hill had a lot of ski traffic from Hartford, Connecticut, from New York City, Albany, New York. They took buses there. The ski trains came into North Adams and they were bussed up to Dutch Hill, much like at Hogback. That seemed to be the nature of the game back in the late 40s, early 50s. And I grew up skiing there as a little kid. Like a lot of Vermont areas, we had 10th Mountain guys that were on the ski patrol and ski instructors and whatnot. And I often say they gave us a long leash, but every once in a while they'd pull us back in if we got a little out of hand. But you had to be impressed with the fact that this group of people got together and made this area in such a short period of time and got it up and operating. Now, they added the T-bar lift. I believe it was in 1946 the T-bar lift went in. And I think it was the second T-bar in the state. Not sure on that, but I think that there was one at Pico Peak before that. However, the one at Dutch Hill was considered first. And I was told, and this is again, I don't know if it's entirely true, but I was told the reason that Dutch Hills was considered the first T-bar in the state was because the one at Pico had wooden stanchions and Dutch Hills had steel stanchions. I don't know, but that's the story. Through the 50s, 60s, the local high schools had free skiing at Dutch Hill on Tuesdays. I happened to be in high school in those years, and we would get on a bus at around noontime and take the 15, 20-minute ride to Dutch Hill, and we'd have skiing until 4 o'clock and for the 2 high schools that were close by. I'm not sure if there were any other high schools involved in that. Most of the clientele, the local clientele, was from North Adams, Mass, which was 7 or 8 miles away. The original investors were from that area, and they chose Dutch Hill. They had a couple of locations down lower in the valley near North Adams where they had these rope tows. And I guess it was the North Adams Ski Club, something like that. And, it was just not reliable for snow, and they got word that this Dutch Hill property was for sale, and it was in what is considered the southern Vermont snow belt. And Prospect Mountain, the cross-country touring center, falls within that, as does Hogback and Dutch Hill. Are all pretty similar size areas within 5 to 10, 15 miles of each other. So that's another reason that area was chosen, because of the natural snowfall that was there. It would be I can certainly remember times in the 50s and 60s that Dutch Hill would close, you know, in April 1st, say, and there'd still be 2 or 3 feet of snow at the snow gauge. You know, people are starting to do spring chores, doing other things. But I went by Dutch Hill today, and it looks like it's October. So there's no leaves on the trees, and there's no snow on the ground. So times have changed a little bit. After the '85 season, and I think over here it says it closed in 1980. I think that's wrong. Marty, my wife Marty here, and I have a set of twin boys that the first area that they ever skied at was Dutch Hill, and they were born in '81. So I'm guessing that it was '84 probably when they were skiing there. And I think it was only 1 or 2 times that they actually skied there, but they did ski there when the area was still open. So I think it closed in '85. It just became overwhelmed by, as many of the mom and pop ski areas did. It got overwhelmed by the bigger areas, and people wanted the amenities that the bigger areas offered. They wanted to go to Mount Snow and go to the outdoor swimming pool and the indoor skating rink. They wanted to take the space age car from the hotel across the lake to, it just, it fell out of, it was something that's missing, I think, in the ski world today, but hopefully, there's an effort, I think, and I think I see an opening for bringing back those mom and pop type areas and the bare bones, raw ski areas that a lot of us remember. The last owner of Dutch Hill, I owned the property for several years, and it was not operating any longer. And looking to find a way to move it, approach the Green Mountain National Forest, and kind of offered it to become part of the Green Mountain National Forest. And the Forest Service looked at it and said, yes, but all of the structures and all the infrastructure has to be gone. So they got the local fire departments together, and they trained on, they burned down the lodges, and they hired a friend of mine and a member of Dash now, former owner of Prospect Mountain, Steve Whittam, who's now the manager of Prospect Mountain, to come in and remove the lift structures. So Steve did that and got the steel out of there, and at that point the Forest Service took it over. So it sat dormant as a ski area. I mean, a few of us went up and did some telemark skiing there in the 80s. It probably into the 90s, but then it started to grow in, and it was growing in quite rapidly, and so that, people were cross-country skiing around in the area, but as it was getting grown in, it was becoming too difficult to do any kind of alpine or touring skiing up there. So what happened? Well, around 2014, the Forest Service came out with south of Route 9, what's the full title of it? Diana knows. Anyway, they did a big study on south of Route 9 property that the Forest Service owned, and they were going to evaluate the property from a recreational point of view, from a wildlife point of view, and from harvesting timber point of view. There was a warning period where for 30 days was you could write a suggestion to the Forest Service as to, some ideas as to what the properties could be used for. And Geoff Nugent, who's a member of our executive committee, had the foresight to write to the Forest Service and say Dutch Hill would be an excellent area for backcountry skiing. And it made its way through the permitting process, through the Forest Service process, and there were meetings, and I was not quite yet involved yet at this point, but I was starting to become aware that that proposal had been made, and it kind of piqued my interest, and I talked to a couple of people about how do you find out about this, and somebody said to me, well, there's some people from Hogback Mountain that, they got something, they were there at a meeting or something like that, and, maybe, so I looked up the Hogback Mountain Conservation thing, and I bumped into somebody's name. This lady was sitting next to me, Todd, and I emailed her, and she said, "Yeah, well, let's go take a look at Dutch Hill and take a walk up there." So my wife Marty and Diana and I got together on a day, and I think it was in the fall. We hiked up to the top of the mountain. We were talking the whole way, thinking about the possibilities. We knew we had to form a nonprofit group. We knew we had to jump through a lot of hoops. We had to satisfy not only the Forest Service, but we needed to become a chapter of the Catamount Trail Association. There was a lot of things that we had to do to get to the point where the Forest Service would say, "You're the group we want." So by the time we got back down to the parking lot, Diana said to me, "Well, would you be willing to be the president of the organization?" And I said, "Well, under one as long as you're willing to be the vice president." So we had an agreement, and there were a number of people that were rock solid, who were going to be involved with writing bylaws. Geoff Nugent was going to do the maps. We had a good core group of people, and we spent about 2 years satisfying the needs of the Catamount Trail Association and satisfying the Forest Service and becoming a Vermont nonprofit. And we became the third chapter of the Catamount Trail Backcountry chapter, third chapter. So that got us to the point where we could put boots on the ground.
Why don't we come back to how those boots have
Sure.
been
Yep.
working? Because these stories are fantastic, and thank you. What's fascinating is that you could apply everything that was just said about both Mount Snow and Dutch Hill to Ascutney, which has gone through multiple different iterations, and like Hogback, has contributed a great deal, not just to skiing, but to the ski industry as well. And I would really encourage, there's some great stories here. We also have an article in Vermont Ski and Ride that goes into some of the backstories behind some of these places, as well as some of the tiny ski areas. So there's some copies. This is an old issue, but there are copies as you go out. But let's hear from your take. Ascutney's kind of like the phoenix, right? Literally. It grew, it saw the fire, and now it's rising again. So, Steve.
Thank you. There's a lot to look at in this room, and it's easy to be distracted here, so I hope that doesn't happen. I noticed that Diana brought her notes, and I'm kind of glad she did, because I brought mine. I don't know if this happens to you, maybe it's just me, but you're right in the middle of saying something, and I can't remember what I was going to say. So I brought my notes. If I refer to them, please forgive me. Mount Ascutney story in many ways. The Mount Ascutney ski area story started when a guy named John Howland fell off his horse in the summer of 1954. But that has nothing to do with skiing starting at Mount Ascutney. That happened in 1938, when a 23-year-old guy by the name of Bob Ely gathered up 12 other friends, and the 13 of them created the Mount Ascutney Ski Club. And it was just that. It was a ski club. They acquired a lease from a local farmer who owned part of the mountain. They cut a ski trail, and it was, even though there was, 4 years into lifts over in Woodstock, this was a climb up and ski back down, and when you get there, if you want to take another run, you know how to do it. And that existed for 3 or 4 years, but then the Second World War intervened, and Bob and a number of the other 12 people shipped overseas. A few of them, 2 men and 5 or 6 women, who lived in the Windsor, West Windsor area, stayed together as a ski club. And in fact, one of them, her friends called her Annie, because that was an Americanized version of her actual given name, worked in a local bank, so what do you know, she became the treasurer. Now, they needed a little bit of money, and I'm not sure where it all came from, but they did have lease payments to make. And while many of the men were off serving their country in the war, the ladies were cutting some brush and taking some runs and doing whatever felt like they wanted to do, because they kind of owned the place. And Annie's husband was a dairy farmer. His name was George. And a couple of years after the first group left, he was part of a group that left to go to the Pacific. He was banging around up in the Aleutians. And so Annie Wood, my mother, was one of the folks who was still up there cutting brush and taking runs and generally enjoying themselves until the boys came back. And when the boys came back, then things really started to happen. That one trail got a lot longer. They built 3 rope tows, one above the other, so you could kind of pick your poison as to how far you wanted to go up the mountain, hanging on to a lift that was going to pull your arms out of your sockets at any moment. Some of us remember those things. And that is really what happened at Mount Ascutney until 1944, when a wealthy woman from New York City bought a large estate overlooking the town of Windsor and the Connecticut River Valley, and she turned the large estate into an inn. She wanted a place to raise her children. Her last name was Cushman. I don't really know all of Kit Cushman's backstory, and it's probably not that important other than to know that she realized that when her guests came in the summer, there was things for them to do, but when they came in the winter, they were kind of just sitting around her inn. So she heard about these people who had started this little local ski club, and she joined it. And the good news was that she had the wherewithal to buy out that lease. So now she'd invested a little capital in the Mount Ascutney Ski Club. It still wasn't a ski area. It really was open to anybody who wanted to join the club, but it was pretty private. Not that many people wanted to do it. And things that were happening there were starting to happen in Woodstock if you were a skier. So Ascutney wasn't the first thing you thought about. And all of that kind of really resonated with the local folks, and a lot of we kids were born after our parents settled down post-World War II, and we became skiers there on the hill. And in my case, 1950, I don't remember it, but I remember my parents telling me that it was the winter of 54, 55. I'll take their word for it. And that started to look like actually a business enterprise. So now John Howland falls off his horse in the summer of 1954. And while he is watching the guy who's teaching his daughter how to ride a horse on crutches, he's on crutches, the guy who's doing the horseback riding teaching is one of those skier types. And he said, "John, you're a successful local businessman. That's what the little Mount Ascutney thing needs, is somebody with some business acumen. We all got other jobs. We're just up there cutting brush and skiing and having a good time and probably drinking a few somethings." John decided that he would do just that, so he bought that lease from Mrs. Cushman for $1,000 cash and $1,000 short-term note, and he created the Mount Ascutney Ski Area, Inc. And that's how we went from 1938 to 1954. By the way, the sign over there says 52. I read John Howland's book the last couple of days about his business enterprises, and he said it was 54, but and actually, who cares? That was the beginning of the growth of Mount Ascutney as a business enterprise, but John owned it as part of his Windsor Machine Tool Products Company. And a few years later, he saw the viability of a commercial ski area on that west side of Mount Ascutney. The interstate highway was on the drawing boards, not yet built. And he decided that it was time to spin this off from his machine tool business and start, it started as an independent company. And not long after that, it started to attract the attention of other people. Many of them were more wealthy people who decided that he had a good thing going and they would see if they could find a way to join him. And in one case, this rather wealthy local newspaper publisher in the Upper Valley became an investor and a board member, and he had big growth plans. And John, who was a pretty wise conservative thinker, looked at some of those growth plans and thought, I've seen a lot of years when the snow doesn't fly. I've seen a lot of years when something happens and it just is, I'm not sure it's going to be affordable. And with a brief passage of time, John found himself on the outside looking in. The other folks, the now a little wider area money folks, had big plans for growth, and they saw the way out of any kind of short-term economic problem is just spending more money, attracting more people, earning more revenue, and therefore being somehow successful. And that continued for the next couple of decades. And when Diana was talking about how the year 1986 was important to her, it was also a seminal year for Mount Ascutney, but for a totally different reason. That was the Tax Reform Act of 1986. And if you remember that, good for you, that was when it became possible for passive real estate investors to take passive losses to shelter active real estate gains that they had on their balance sheet. And what that did was bring a lot more money into Mount Ascutney, in the neighborhood of $50 million, because it was an attractive investment one way or another. If it wins, great. If it loses, okay, I can use it. The trouble is, it attracted too much easy money. Too much stuff got built, and it's one thing to build it, it's another thing to maintain it, it's another thing to pay the electricity, the insurance, keep it painted, put roofs on it, keep the equipment running, and it started a perpetual process of success and failure. And I think I got my numbers pretty close to right, 6, 7, 8 owners over 2 or 3 decades, at least 3 bankruptcies. And then by the end of the 2010 ski season, the whole thing went belly up for the last time. And it sat that way for several years while real estate values dropped precipitously. The grocery store in downtown Brownsville, well, downtown, in Brownsville.
Upper downtown.
Yeah. The grocery store closed, and things were pretty grim. And so grim that thanks to the leadership of the local Board of Selectmen, and especially one member of the Board of Selectmen who had the forethought to, his name was Ted Siegler, to have the forethought to say, why don't we buy and people thought he'd lost his mind. Why don't we buy the ski area? And to a lot of people, I think it sounds like the dog who chases cars and then finally catches one. Now what are we going to do? But the town did, and it found a way to buy it on the condition that a nonprofit be established that had the skill, the means and the ability to tear down the old lodge that, by the way, burned in 2015, somewhat mysteriously. Things happen, which cost round numbers $100,000 to tear down a fallen down, burned out building. And Ascutney Outdoors was formed as that nonprofit organization. It's a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation. Technically, under Vermont law, it's called a public benefit nonprofit. And it had the ability to raise the money. It had the ability to raise the money to do what needed to be done. And those things included not only tearing down the old lodge, but tearing down one of the chairlifts that hadn't been torn down previously. We harvested the 3-cylinder gasoline motor that was at the top of that chairlift that was there for the purpose of, if the power failed, we could still take the people off by using the 3-cylinder motor to creep the cable around. And we used that as the means to power a rope tow that local people engineered and built themselves. And then one success brought on another success, and eventually, with the generosity of people who had the means to be generous, we raised several $1 million. We bought a secondhand rope tow, T-bar, in Canada, drove up with a flatbed truck, loaded the thing on, brought it down and started scraping rust. And it stands there today looking brand new. We've rebuilt the rope tow, we built a tubing lift, and we built on part of the foundation of the old lodge a new building called the Ascutney Outdoor Center, which in many ways is much busier during the warm weather months than it is during the cold weather months. It's the base of operations during the winter ski and riding and tubing season, but it also is the place of weddings, funerals, birthday parties, and many, many sporting events that in some cases bring many thousand people to West Windsor, to the point where the Board of Selectmen have said, let's keep the multi-thousand people events to 6 a year, please. Which in a way simply goes to suggest that once something gets its momentum and it's something that is sustainable, it has real promise. We are at a point right now in Ascutney Outdoors where 9 years, the founders of the nonprofit 9 years ago are, most of them say aging out, but let's just say they're moving on in their lives. And we're done building stuff. And now the board has to make a pivot from creating this outdoor recreation facility that does all the things that it does to maintaining and preserving and doing and running it sustainably. Because we've learned from those who came before us how if you lose sight of sustainability, you put yourself at great peril. I want to close by making one last comment about Ascutney. We have a list of about 150 people who volunteer, who are parking lot attendants in the rain, who are lift attendants, who clean the inside of the lodge, that are there to set up and take down from a wedding or a birthday party. And without that group of volunteers, it wouldn't work. Thank you very much for your attention.
I encourage you, if you've not been there, there's also, I think with all of these areas, there is terrific backcountry as well as groomed terrain there. So lastly, we have magic, which a lot of people think of Mad River Glen as the magic of the north.
Correct.
I think Geoff is coined that one. But Geoff Hatheway has been involved with it in a number of different iterations, and I think it's really thanks to you that it is back. It's a functioning for-profit, or certainly trying to be for-profit ski area, and it's really brought back a lot of the soul and the fun to skiing that I think has been missing in recent years. So tell us a little bit about your journey with magic.
Isn't Mad River the magic of the north?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah.
Well, good to be here with everyone. Thank you. Yeah, it's been quite the journey. And we do think we're bringing back a little of the soul back into skiing. That's certainly why I'm doing it. Not doing it for to make millions of dollars, that's for sure. You can't do that in the ski business, can you? You can lose millions of dollars. But, it's great to hear the stories from some of the places that were but aren't quite there again, but there's hope for recreational use of properties. For Ascutney, which was half hour from when I was in college at Dartmouth, and we used to go there quite a bit, so I know a little bit about Ascutney and its past. So it's, Parker's over there, and Parker's going, Geoff, you're the big guy in this group. Very unusual. Usually I'm in, Ski Vermont meetings or NSA meetings, and I'm one of the smaller guys in the group, but I'm the big commercial guy here, I guess. But we're excited where we are now. I mean, going back, 1960 is when Hans Thorner founded Magic. So really interesting area because it was kind of a little bit of an influx of European style skiing that came to America. So it was, the 60s were an era of, at least, where I grew up skiing, in the Golden Triangle, what became the Golden Triangle, which was Magic, Bromley and Stratton were the big guys. But Bromley had been around with Fred Pabst starting it. Fred Pabst also started Mount Aeolus ski area in the late 1920s, something like that. And that's where I live right now. So, things come full circle sometimes. But so you had Fred Pabst, Bromley, American, born and bred. And then in 1960, Magic was founded by Hans Thorner, Swiss. And then over at Stratton, a year or two later, Stratton was born and had a huge Austrian influx. And so there's probably some of that stuff here. They have very famous emo Heinrich ski school and things of that sort. I took lessons there. I also took lessons when I was a kid on Timber Ridge, which was the backside of Magic. It was, when I first went there, it was still called Glebe Mountain Farms, and then became Timber Ridge, and so I had one of my favorite ski instructors over there. So, the ski industry is very tight. Used to be a lot tighter, I think, back in the day. It's still very much a industry built on camaraderie, but obviously that's changed over the years, right? I don't know if you guys are familiar with Stowe, but obviously they're owned by Vail Corp. Okimo's owned by Vail. Mount Snow owned by Vail. Stratton now owned by Alterra. Sugarbush owned by Alterra. So there's a lot of great hills with a lot of great history. And what we're trying to do at Magic right now is keep that heritage alive of what skiing was and used to be. It was more community based. It was camaraderie with your fellow skiers, not competition, to get in line, struggle from the parking lot to the line to the, to find a space on the trail to ski and things of that sort. We appreciate everything that the big guys bring in terms of a lot of new equipment, a lot of investment in these areas, some of which would be struggling right now, right? On the other side, there needs to be other areas out there that are independent, that are thinking about the customer experience more than their pocketbook, that there's a feeling of camaraderie out there on the slopes, that you could meet someone on a double lift. 14 minutes up, 1,500 vertical feet. Get to know them, chat with them, find out what they're about, what runs they like, things of that sort. I used it with my kids to tell stories. The kids just love stories, and it's like they're busy with all their things, right? A 14-minute ride with your son is quite the experience. You don't often get to do that. They're always on a phone or something's going on, and this brings you back to when I was growing up skiing, and that's what I liked about it as well. So they got to hear a lot of strange stories from Dad, but it was a lot of fun. So Hans Stoner started in 1960 and basically had a Swiss village concept in mind back then. Now you see a lot of village concepts out there, but he wanted everything to have a Swiss feel. When they created land to develop and buy houses, they were all Swiss in look and feel. They're still that way today. Some of these have been updated. We've gotten rid of some of the people who come now have updated the rugs from the rust-colored 1960s shag rugs. Actually, oh, they are, yeah. So, but it's, he had a concept in mind, and he brought that concept from Europe. And I think it was unique and is part of the flavor of the 1960s and 70s and how skiing developed, along with Stratton with their Austrian heritage. I remember going to races at Stratton and listening to the Oompa bands of the Stratton Mountain Boys, and it was a really unique flavor, and that stuff is great. We're not bringing back kind of the Swiss heritage, it's there. We're just bringing back that communal feel that you get. Everyone goes to the bar or hangs out by a fire pit or, just hangs out, tells stories about their ski day. And not really about what you do for a living. It's all about the sport. And Hans did a great job in starting that. His family basically owned it until about 1985. And that was kind of the start of the era of bigger corporations coming in and starting to buy some ski areas and maybe combine some ski areas. And so in 1985, there was a group, some of which still are there right now. They have a piece of Bromley, but they bought Magic, combined it with Timber Ridge on the backside. So Timber Ridge was always kind of shaky, so combined it with Timber Ridge on the backside, and it became Timberside at Magic. So the two areas were combined. They also owned Bromley. So there was your, mega resort right there. Started right then. And it wasn't good for Magic, it turns out, this combination, because in the late 80s, the real estate market started to squeeze and drop. And the people who owned the conglomerate, we'll call it, decided we're going to get rid of Magic and Timber Ridge and just hold on to Bromley. So on the way out, so that was in 1991 that Magic ceased operations, so it was lost. And on the way out, Bromley, not blaming Bromley, I'm just saying the people who owned Bromley at the time decided, well, we want to make sure Magic doesn't come back as a competitor, and destroyed a lot of the equipment, sold off a lot of the chairs. Snowmaking system was in tatters, things of that sort. So, it was a competitive business. That's just the reality of big business, I guess, in the ski industry. So really interesting that, Magic ceased operations from 1991 to 1997, so about 6 years. In 6 years, it's amazing how many people forget that Magic even exists. To this day, people go to me, oh, I didn't know Magic was open. So those things get embedded pretty quickly. And trails were overgrown, and obviously there were there was one lift left, running bottom to top, the red chair, 1971 Heron Poma, classic. That's the two-seater that I would tell my stories on. So about that time, there was a dentist out of New Jersey who decided, hey, we need to bring this back. The only way you could ski Magic back then was to hike it, and it was really good. I mean, Magic, the reason Hans Thorner purchased the land and said, this is the place I want to build, even though there was probably a bigger mountain across the valley, was that it reminded him of the mountains in Switzerland on a smaller scale. It just had the ridge lines, it had a couple of ridge lines that would go across but also come out, and you can ski off those ridge lines into valleys. And it was very steep. It was like Mad River, Smugs up here in terms of the style of terrain, very different than what you get in southern Vermont. Because southern Vermont is Stratton, Mount Snow, Bromley, which are all great mountains. I mean, I skied at all of them, but they're not quite as exciting and challenging as Magic was, and that's what Hans Thorner wanted back then. And it still makes it unique to this day. And that's the beauty of this sport, is there's so many great options out there, and it's a shame to lose some of those. It's the nature of business sometimes, but it's great when you have an opportunity to come back and find something that is worthwhile keeping. And there was, about that same time, that's when my kids were getting born, while Magic was closed. So we had grown up kind of skiing Stratton most of the time. My parents had season passes there. And we were like, I was like, nah, I can't go back. We can't raise our kids at Stratton. It's not the same as it was. And so about that time, these guys restarted Magic, and we checked it out in '99 when my first child was 5 years old. And my brother said, you gotta try Magic, it's really good. Remember that when we skied it as kids? And it really was. And what made it great was that you instantly felt really welcome. There was a community there that had wanted Magic to come back. And this was their opportunity, and they were just so friendly. It's like immediately you were part of a family. So we volunteered for everything. I don't know, Alpine Club, we were racing, when free ride became bigger, we were part of the free ride team. Our kids were all over the place. And then, so went through a number of different owners, operators. It was always struggling to open. It's like every year, is it gonna open? Yep, it's gonna open. Didn't have a whole lot of snowmaking, but it did have some slowly being repaired from when it was destroyed over the years. And so, basically, as Lisa said, I decided to volunteer, not totally volunteer, but got paid a little bit of money to help them with marketing in 2011, 12, 13. So I really got to understand the ski business, and I said, this place could really do well if it had some investment. Not over-invest, like Ascutney did. Not you, but I mean, they over-invested way beyond what is kind of would be reasonable for that type of area. But to invest kind of with the mindset of bringing it back to what it could be, with keeping it a smaller field type of mountain, not overdeveloping it, but doing enough in terms of snowmaking, lifts, and the lodge to just make it viable and sustainable. So in 2014, Magic was going through another it was still the same owners, but they changed operators back to one of the owners. And, they had a decent first year, because in 14-15, it was like, oh, it snowed. It's one of those years when it actually snows. And then it stayed cold the entire winter. And they basically could do well without snowmaking. And then in 15 and 16, it was a terrible year. It reminds me of this year. and they didn't make a lot of snow. They didn't open until mid-January, and they were not going to be able to reopen. So there was a multi-ownership group. One of the other owners came to me and said, Geoff, would you think about putting a group together to buy it? Crazy enough, I did. And I got a bunch of, locals who owned land around Magic, so they were kind of invested in the proposition of Magic, and also suckered in a bunch of my Dartmouth friends to invest in this plan that I had for kind of rebuilding Magic. Different vision, let's say, from Hans, but taking his beautiful trail layout, his vision for how a mountain should ski, and updating a few things without changing the character of the place. And it's a hard thing to do. To change the character of a place can either be great or you can kill it. I didn't want to change the character because the character was really strong ethos of what skiing was about, making sure you could uphill without a cost to it if you wanted to do that it was there for the community as well. And I think we've taken, a property that is special to me, my kids, and hopefully we've made it sustainable for future generations so that it doesn't go back on the lost list, but continues to be found. So that's kind of what I'm doing now, and we'll see how it goes. Next year it needs to snow though.
Tucket is a downhill free-for-all, correct? With
Well, we've got a few weird events that we do, yes.
Anyway, go to Magic. It's really fun. I have a long list of questions, which these guys I think have mainly answered. So I'm going to turn this over to the audience for questions, but I did have one question first. We've talked a little bit about the big ones, the Alterras, the Vail Resorts, and my question is, since they've come, since the day ticket prices are up in the 200 sphere, has this helped or hurt the efforts that you guys are doing?
Paying for parking has done a great service.
It's only a 2-hour drive from here, and it actually takes less time to get there than up the mountain road somewhere, right?
Yeah, so Bill and Alterra and all of that, their passes have done some amazing things for the ski industry because the passes are actually relatively cheap. You can tell now they're going up in price though, so watch out. But they really did provide the means for people to now go out west. Ski Vermont here. Now go out west to go on vacation instead of buying, expensive day tickets out there. You just buy the pass, and then you can also use those passes obviously locally here. So it's a really good deal. So there's no question about that. It puts a lot of pressure, and did put a lot of pressure, still putting a lot of pressure on independent areas to survive, because it really created a ceiling in many respects for what you could charge for a pass. And we've got insurance to cover and a lot of other things to cover, payroll and all that kind of good stuff. So it puts a lot of pressure on independent ski areas who are out there on their own trying to figure things out. And so you have to be very entrepreneurial. You got to think on your feet, and you got to do things differently, and you got to put out a message that, yeah, we're different, and we're different for a reason. You can actually go, not wait in line. You don't have to pay for parking. You're going to get a more affordable meal, more affordable day ticket. Our pass may be similar in price, and you can't go everywhere on our pass. You can go to Magic though. And you're going to find an experience that is very different. Freedom on the slopes. You're not going to run, not to say anything bad, not to run into, it's a better, for us, we think, a better experience, but it's very different. A lot of people don't want to go on a slow lift. right? So, they spend a ton of money on lift infrastructure, and that's really good for a lot of people. Again, it puts more pressure on independents to upgrade their systems, and we don't have a corporate backing, to do all that. So it's got to come from our pockets. But if you do it in a way that creates a vision that is different from what a whole generation has known. So a whole generation knows only high-speed lifts, doesn't remember what skiing was like, only knows whatever experience you get in a lodge with expensive food and all this kind of stuff. So the idea is keep things as affordable as possible for people and still make a living running a ski area. It's a hard thing to do, and it's been made tough. But they give us a great contrast for our vision of how independent ski areas can operate versus the major corporations. And people are, we don't have the commercial advertising and marketing power that they do. But people are starting to get the message. And the biggest thing is when people come, they go, oh, I get it now. It's very self-selecting, naturally. But a lot of people don't realize what skiing was. And we're introducing it to a new generation. And Vail and Altera, especially Vail, has given us a great counterpoint to tell our story. So for that, we're thankful for them. And I think, I think it's a very exciting time. I think Indy Pass, if independent resorts are on that, that's another thing that we didn't have 6 years ago. And Indy Pass lets you go to 2 places, 2 visits to 180 independent resorts during a year. That's another way for people to get out and explore more mountains, which is not a bad thing. They don't all have to ski at Magic, every day of the year. That'd be great. But there are a lot of great places out there. So I think things have been created because as a counterpoint to the mega conglomerates. And so that's a good thing.
That's great. Do we have any questions from the floor? Yes.
So I am an Epic Pass holder and an Indy Pass holder, and thank you very much for bringing this mountain back. Because all the mountains have been great. Bill Haney, who used to work at Ascutney, I finally convinced him to get an Indy Pass. We can see him all over New England, and it's been fantastic.
Yeah, great.
It's been great to be able to chase this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Good, that's great to hear.
So one of the great advantages of the slow lifts is that the slopes aren't crowded. And I think that's the thing that we really experience skiing at some of the smaller resorts.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, the less crowded slopes, and also by 10 o'clock, everything is not skied off. So we actually have grooves, we make snow, and there have been times where I'm getting fresh quarter at 3 o'clock when I close them out. So,
I just want to make a comment that of the 161 million Americans that are working today, roughly, 60% of them, as we all hear, finish their work week or work year and do not have a penny in the bank for emergencies, paycheck to paycheck. So I think you've got a potential built-in demand there to serve in the face of $200 a day lift tickets, and despite $600-700 season passes, if you're $100 a day a winter skier at $10 a day, like at Breckenridge, maybe Stowe, do the math.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. We know the ski industry in general is not bringing a lot of new people into, that's one of the things, it's very flat growth in terms of new people coming into the sport and how important that is. And a lot of these smaller areas where you've kind of first started skiing, a lot of those have been lost over the years. They used to be in almost in every town in Vermont, or I remember even in New York, in Westchester, there'd be a little, rope hill on this hill or whatever. And that's how people got introduced to skiing. It wasn't all of a sudden you got, you know, obviously it's very expensive from clothes, equipment, lessons, you know, lift tickets now. So having a more affordable ways for people to get involved in skiing is important. That's why it's so important for these independent areas to survive in some of these places.
Yeah, and in an area like Dutch Hill, which is strictly backcountry now, there's no infrastructure there whatsoever, but, you know, we're totally reliant on volunteer labor, volunteer help, and that's how we get it done. And I think there truly is, I think there's an opportunity going forward that a lot of these lost areas, not all of them, but some of them might be in a position to be able to form a nonprofit, and you know, maybe it's backcountry, maybe it becomes maybe eventually start with a roto like you did, and then you know you raise funds, but I think there's room for a cooperative approach, and I think that brings back a lot of the soul of skiing. I did not take one ski run this winter at Dutch Hill. It was just not that great a winter, and I didn't get, you know, the opportunity was there a day or two here and there, but I just didn't get it. I carried a chainsaw up that mountain, sometimes twice in the same day in the fall. But I'll tell you, walking down at the end of the day, with your fellow volunteers, it's a really incredibly good feeling to realize that, you know, you're putting some sweat equity into something that you know you're going to be able to use, and you see the volunteers come, and they're you know, we've had volunteers come from New York City, Boston, you know, Rhode Island, and we're a little tiny area, you know, and we've had children up there, 5, 6, 7 years old, flipping, you know, branches, and the Forest Service is okay with that, as long as they've got a hard hat on, bicycle helmets work, gloves, eye protection, they can work. And so we're hoping to teach this younger generation, you know, to make an investment into their recreational areas.
I just wanted to make one extra point. Like in Middlebury, there used to be a lost ski area in the south side of Chipman Hill, and it was formed by the Middlebury Ski Club, which was basically people from the college in the town that wanted to get skiing going. And there were huge social networks and friendships that came out of that.
Sure.
And when you're all pitching in to kind of make something happen, there's something magic that kind of happens around the edges. And so it has that kind of potential.
Yeah, I really think it's, you know, and I mean this sincerely, you know, the fact that the corporate, and I have an Epic Pass, don't get me wrong, but, you know, that segment of the population that's being priced out of that market, there's room, I think, coming for, you know, local hills to be looked at again, and the people who come together and form groups and create that experience.
That Brattleboro Hill is.
Sure.
is
Yeah.
$5 a day.
Yep.
I have a question, it's a little bit more directed towards the Ascutney and Magic crew, but I've noticed a shift sort of recently, maybe not so recent, but a shift towards supporting local people, you know, actually using their dollars to vote in a way, you know, like putting it back into local communities and things like that. And I'm wondering if you've noticed, you know, any sentiment or traffic from the people that come to your areas that, you know, talk about that, or if that's noticeable from your perspective.
I'm afraid I'm sitting right under the microphone or that thing, and I couldn't really hear what you were saying. So Jeff, you start the answer, and
Yeah.
I'll.
We've definitely seen that at Magic. People do want to support local. We do, you know, we do special passes for Vermonters. We do special price passes for that. We have local days as well for Vermont and New Hampshire residents on Thursdays and Fridays. We get a lot of ambassadors, volunteers, things of that sort. We do blade work and things of that sort, a lot of local volunteers for that. I think we've seen that, and it also has to, we have to give something back to, the community as well. So I think it's an important relationship to have, back and forth, and I think, we definitely try and do what we can. When the flood happened this summer, we had close to $1 million of damages that were not covered, and that there was really no help from FEMA because that's commercial versus private. But our town was suffering. We didn't make it about ourselves. Our town was suffering. We did a fundraiser at Magic, got Stratton, got Brownlee to come together on it to raise funds for the Stratton Foundation, which was doing work locally, for even smaller businesses than ourselves, that were directly impacted as well. So, we raised $40,000, in one concert, for, local community. So I think, it's a two-way street, I think. If you are thinking about your local population, we also hire locally, so all of our workers are local. And so that relationship was frayed over time. When Magic was kind of back and forth, would it open, would it not, and anyway. So I think we've seen that trend to support local, but I think it's also important, vice versa, to support our locals.
For Ascutney, basically what he said is true at Ascutney as well. Earlier I was talking about an era at Mount Ascutney when it was a small local ski area, and it kind of had its problems when it tried to be a resort. Today, we're a small local ski area again. And I think we identify more with the Cochranes and the northeast slopes of the world than we do even with Magic. Because we are the $20 lift ticket that is really an incubator for the larger ski areas and for the industry as a whole. So it's really all about just doing what we do for the experience of having our children and grandchildren do what we did in the 50s and 60s.
Sorry.
Geoff, I just wanted to make comments on your red chair. I very much enjoy that red chair. I very much enjoy the old school feeling with that. And as I get older, I appreciate the long ride.
Thank you. Sorry, we built a new quad, so the red chair is not running quite as much. But yes,
Put one up.
it'll be there.
I would just wanted to say I applaud all of the work and volunteer hours and sweat equity and capital that you guys are all doing. I can have fun at a small mountain or a big mountain, it doesn't really matter as long as there's snow. And so I worry about snow. And I just wonder about your ability to build the infrastructure to make snow, or if you can, or if you're planning to, or how you're managing that in your.
I'll tell you how we think about it
in your
at Scotty.
planning.
We don't make snow.
Okay.
We sell a season's pass we call a supporter pass. It's $120 for a family, and it's intentional, which is to say that if we have skiing, your supporter pass gets you up the lift. If we don't have skiing, thank you for your contribution. And we need that to come back next year. But we believe that for us, adding snowmaking would be such an expensive proposition, and that we just chose not to do it. So we're back to just being natural snow only. Although I'm proud to say that we can sure get a lot of skiing on 4 inches of snow. Part of that is because if you've ever been to Ascutney skier, you know that it's a rocky hill. And we've left enough P-Tex now on top of all of the rocks.
Well, I want to just, number one, thank everybody. I know it's getting a little bit late and some of these guys have driven a long ways. So what I was going to suggest is that if people have some more questions, we can break into smaller groups. I think Parker, is the bar still open?
Bar's open.
Bar's open. Parker's, yeah. But, okay. But thank you especially to all of our panelists, many of whom drove 2 hours plus to get here. Not just for driving, but for doing all the work that you've done to keep skiing alive and keep the soul of skiing. And thank you to Poppy and Abby and the Ski Museum for putting on this amazing exhibit. And I've been here, I think, 3 times already, and I still am seeing stuff that I didn't notice before. So take some time, look around, come back.